Welcome. Today is Tuesday. It's our move into stillness meeting. And as you can possibly hear, my voice is still recovering, but much better than yesterday. So should not be a problem as long as you can hear me. So this is an exploration of what it is to be a soma. So, of course, you might be curious about what a soma is. That would make sense if you were curious about that, because it's not something that we are normally, it's not something we hear about normally. We don't hear about it on the news or on Facebook. So you might wonder what it is, and that's really what we're here to discover. So it's an experiential process. It's not merely theoretical. And so that's good news. Well, it's good news and bad news. The bad news, I guess, is not really bad news, but it's bad news only in a limited sense, which is that because it's not something we're accustomed to, because it's new, because it involves learning, and because it involves learning about ourselves, which are all things that most of us are taught implicitly or explicitly to avoid, because everything, everything's supposed to be convenient, push button easy. And if, every solution is supposed to be like that. And so if you don't get that solution that you think you're going for in 5 minutes time, I guess it doesn't work, is what the mind says. And we'll move on to the next thing. But this is something you have to apply yourself to. So now the good news is that it's very worth applying yourself to, because by applying yourself to it, you can get the benefits that the majority won't, because the majority aren't willing to apply themselves. Well, first of all, the majority are not even aware that something like this even exists. Now you're sitting here and you're wondering what this is. And that's what we're exploring together. But think about this. Most people are not even in this meeting. That's kind of the importance of this, though, is that this is the thing that this is among the handful of things that can authentically, genuinely change your life for the better. And so you're in the right place, and that's good news. So you've got that going for you. And I would encourage you to take a moment to actually be grateful for that. To actually notice that of all of the things that you could be doing, here you are learning about something that you don't even know what it is. And most people are just doing the same thing that doesn't work. You see, so you're actually learning something new. You're in a situation where you're exposed to something new and you're interested. So that's a miracle in and of itself. And it's very sincerely, it is worth taking a moment to reflect upon and see if you can notice some authentic gratitude that you're here and not somewhere else. And you think about all the other things that you've done, all the other places you've been, all the other ways that you've sought after the solution to your problem. And in truth, you never even got closer to understanding what the problem even is. You got different names for it. And here we have a name for it too. I'll give it to you in case you don't already know. We call the problem in Somatics, which is what these Tuesday meetings are. So we look at it through that framework. We call the problem in this context sensory motor amnesia. But notice that name doesn't do you any good. It only does some good as part of our conversation. and the conversation is something that's helpful to help you to be educational, so that you can start to discover things, so that you can start to do things differently, so that you can start to have a different experience. And so it's essential and good in that way. But in and of itself, the name does nothing for you, right? So here's the point at which most people check out, because they say, well, 5 minutes in, 9 minutes in actually, but and I'm not feeling better yet, so I guess it doesn't work. And all I got, it's like, I attended a move into stillness meeting, and all I got is this lousy phrase. So, but let's take a look at why this is good news. So sensory motor amnesia. Well, now think about this for a second. Now you have sensory motor amnesia is one of those things where you don't know what that means. It's another one of those things. So now we've introduced two things that you don't know what they are: a soma and sensory motor amnesia. Now, be curious about it, right? So you have to be curious. Well, what if you take the attitude of everything here is a value for you? Every single thing is a value for you, should you choose to receive it, should you choose to apply it. So then it really be, allow yourself to be, have kind of poised attentiveness. You should be very curious, because you have the expectation that everything here is something of value for you, something that could really, even just some little discovery from this is something that can benefit you. So there's nothing wasted here. Every single thing is of value. And so it's up to you to come to it with that attitude. So sensory motor amnesia is the name that we give to the problem. But now notice, you have a problem or many problems, and you have other names for those problems, right? And notice that every one of those names, see if you can think of the names that you've given to the problem recently, or the names you've given to the problem in the past. Maybe you still think you have a whole bunch of problems, and you have a lot of different names for all the different problems, right? So notice you've got different names. I'll just give you some examples of the kinds of names, post-traumatic stress, anxiety, chronic pain from an accident of some kind, whiplash, chronic whiplash, chronic anything, chronic fatigue, on and on, mood problems, depression. You got a lot of problems, financial problems, relationship problems, all kinds of problems, health problems, digestive problems, on and on. Okay, so you can come up with names for all those problems. Now notice that each one of those names it has a whole story attached to it. So it's not the name in and of itself, you wouldn't remember unless it was connected with the story. The story is why you remember the name through repetition. So now here's the thing about each of the ways that you've approached each of those stories. Each of the stories is that each of the stories hasn't delivered to you the actual solution. It hasn't delivered to you what you actually want. In fact, what you're getting out of the deal is more of what you don't want. So we have a whole bunch of ways that we understand the problem, but here, notice the power in this. I'm inviting you for this moment to open to the possibility that most, if not all, of the problems that you have, we could more accurately and usefully term sensory motor amnesia. So I'm not saying necessarily every single one, but maybe, definitely most of them. Definitely the overwhelming majority of the physical problems. Anything chronic is overwhelmingly likely to be sensory motor amnesia. So just start to think now, how many things do you have that are chronic? How much chronic pain do you have? How much chronic limited range of motion do you have? How much chronic fatigue do you have? How much chronic oversensitivity to whatever, fill in the blank, do you have? All of these are common manifestations of sensory motor amnesia. So think about that for a moment. What if the majority of the problems that you're facing in life, despite the stories that you have about them and the various names that you give to them, what if the majority of them, I mean, what if even only just half of them, what if we're just conservative like that? What if only half of them were sensory motor amnesia? And when you understand what it is and what to do about it, you can help yourself to be free of those problems. What might that be like? Well, you might say, actually, I don't know. I understand. I have that problem. You know, that's a good problem to have, actually. You know, I mean, it doesn't seem like it at the time, but that's a problem that we can deal with. That's just a problem of, I've been so crushed by all of my problems for so long that I didn't know. I was totally fixated on that, and I forgot about everything else. I forgot that I wanted anything else. I forgot that anything else was even possible. I forgot that I'm here to be an expression of joy. I forgot that. So that's the situation. If it's been long enough and bad enough, you can find yourself in that situation, but that's a bit, like I said, that's not a bad problem to have. What that means is you start having that problem when you're face to face with the reality that you actually have the power to help yourself. And that means that you're in a very, very good place. So it's okay to see that or feel that, but just notice for a second, just open to this possibility that at least 50% of your problems are things that you're doing to yourself that you don't know that you're doing, but you can remember how you're doing them and you can stop. And thereby you will cease to have the problems, not by overcoming anything, not by working hard at it, not by skillfully maneuvering some situation, because these are problems that were never being done to you by some external thing. You were never a victim of anything else. You were only a victim of your own unconsciousness. And you, by being conscious and applying yourself, can, given a reasonably short amount of time, actually, but not necessarily like a finger snap, but we're talking days, weeks, months of dedicated, correct application of the techniques that will remedy the problem, which is sensory motor amnesia. You can be free of those problems because you'll no longer be creating them. You'll no longer be doing them to yourself. Now, you might say, I'm not doing anything to myself. What are you talking about? I've been struggling with chronic fatigue or anxiety or depression or chronic pain for 20, 30, 40 years. And I'm definitely not doing it. Definitely not doing it. Nobody would do this to themselves. But notice that when you hold to that belief, what you're really doing is you're holding on to those other stories, those other names. You have another name for it now, and you're clinging to that story, which means but notice those stories all have something in common, all those other stories, and see if you can spot it. It has to do with your agency in this situation. It's not hard to see. All those other stories have in common that you are a victim, meaning you don't have agency. It's not your fault. You didn't do it, and you can't do anything about it because something or someone has that power over you, even if that something is time. And this is why Thomas Hanno went on at length about what he called the myth of aging, because in this in culture broadly, we are taught to accept that time, we are victims of time, and that aging means a decline, that we are beaten down by time, torn apart by time. This is how we have been taught. This is a story. It's not reality. But notice the effects that believing that story has. When we believe that story, as almost all of us do to some extent, because we've been inculcated by this culture, that we must believe, as the majority do, that we are being ravaged by time and there's nothing anybody can do about it, and it's inevitable that as time continues, you will decline. This is what we are taught. And notice that when we believe that, what happens? You can see it around you. You see what is the model of aging that you expect and accept as inevitable. And you start to see that actually it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because we believe it, we act as if it is true. And because we act as if it is true, we produce all the evidence that it is in fact true. But, it's pretty decisively, I would say, demonstrated that what we accept as normal aging in the Western culture, dominant culture on the earth at this moment, is that we accept as inevitable decline with aging. That is something that is exclusively manifest by those who believe it. There are other cultures and other times that demonstrate that it's not a universal reality, that's an inevitable thing that must happen to all human beings. It is just something that happens to those who act as if it's true. So we're dealing with fundamentally here, it is about our conditioning. So nobody's doing it to us. It's just our own conditioning, but that conditioning is unconscious. So sensory motor amnesia is the term that Thomas Hanna coined to describe, and I would say pretty well, what's going on here. So sensory motor amnesia is not just another boogeyman. That's important. Most other things are just another boogeyman. You can change the label. At one time, there were certain labels were in vogue and then they fall out of vogue. It was like chronic fatigue was in vogue for a little while, and then that went out, and now it's, fibromyalgia, and then that when that goes, then it will be the next one. And you notice that I understand there's maybe some genuine research that goes into these things, but I think they're pretty far. Most of those are looking not at the source, they're looking pretty far along the chain of events. They're seeing the effects rather than the causes. And so these labels are really about the effects. They're describing symptoms. They're describing what this profile is that they can see visually, clinically, laboratory, and so forth and so on, but they're describing the symptoms. So notice it's just another boogeyman. You call it fibromyalgia. It doesn't come with that understanding doesn't bring with it the answer. It just brings with it more fear, more overwhelm. Oh my goodness, now look at how terrible it is. I thought it was bad before, but now that I've got this label and this lab work and these medical images and this diagnosis and this thing, oh my goodness, I had no idea I was in such bad shape. I mean, I knew I was pretty bad off, but now it's real dire. That image shows that I'm falling apart, and that lab result shows that I'm should be dead. And this is really bad. But it doesn't tell me what I can do. It offers maybe palliative care. bandages. But fundamentally, if any of those things worked, you wouldn't be here now. So that's why we want to be really honest and be open to this model as a standalone. Be willing to set aside what you think not to, nobody's trying to brainwash you here. You can pick all that stuff up again if you want, but just for our purposes here, come fresh. Really be willing to see without all of the unnecessary biases as best as possible. So sensory motor amnesia, Thomas Hanna had these insights. Interesting. I won't go into too much of the history in this meeting, but he said, look, there's this there is a neurological phenomenon going on. This, all of these symptoms are mediated by the nervous system. So, there's a lot of people out there who's otherwise very intelligent people trying to fix these problems, but they're not noticing something very fundamental, which is that everything in the body, everything is controlled by the nervous system. Everything. Not only controlled by the nervous system, but everything is experienced entirely through the nervous system. You could kind of reduce it down to just the nervous system. I mean, everything else is necessary, obviously, but it's all built upon the nervous system, without which the rest of it doesn't do anything. Your muscles don't do anything without a nervous system. If you have no brain and no nerves, your muscles aren't going to do anything. Your heart won't beat. You won't breathe. You won't digest food. Nothing at all will happen without your nervous system. That's how critical and central to everything the nervous system is. And yet, it's generally overlooked. There's you can go to specialists for, your bones, and specialists for your muscles, and specialists for this, and specialists for that, specialists for your foot. Now, you can go to, okay, granted, you can go to somebody who specializes in the nervous system, but even then, they put blinders on and they ignore the nervous system. And they're only interested in these theories about, nerve inflammation and things, which is a downstream effect. When you understand that the nervous system is producing and mediating, moderating, and otherwise central to every experience that is occurring, that it is why your muscles contract or don't. No movement takes place in your body unless your nervous system issues the command. Well, no, Hanna didn't ignore this. He glimpsed something powerful and he took hold of it. And despite, I'm sure, ridicule, to be honest, I imagine many people who, in academia and elsewhere would have, and probably to this day would ridicule this tremendously powerful insight. And who am I to say, well, it speaks for itself. That's the thing. You don't have to take my word for it. You just have to apply it, and then you see that you see the power of it because it works. So based on this insight, Thomas Hanna said, well, look, okay, you got a person who's got, a bad back. Why? What's wrong with their back? You got to wonder, well, what does somebody really mean when they say they have a bad back? Now think about this. See, this is the power of the stories that we tell ourselves. If you say you have a bad back, notice there's a story that goes along with that. So whatever your most troubling symptom is, I don't care what it is. It could be physical, non-physical, however you understand it, but just think about that problem. And you have a name for it. Maybe you have a lot of names for it. Pick one, pick the name, and just notice there's a story that goes along with that. As soon as you have that name for it, and notice that when you have that story, you're in some sense entranced by it. It it it's like it closes a door on something. You follow that story. You accept limitations because that story requires certain limitations. In order to accept that you have a bad back, for example, you have to accept that limitation, the limitations that go along with it, and a model. So in the case of a bad back, a person's got a model, and whatever the story is that you have about your symptom, you've got a model. You've got some kind of uh, mental model, some kind of idea. There might be imagery, there might be thoughts, but somehow you've constructed a model to represent whatever this thing is that is bothering you. So it's kind of now out there, it's objectified, it's a thing, it's something that's happening, the bad back. And the story goes, it's something inevitably, it's something that happened in the past, and all things have, not gotten better, and it's never going to get better. And there's a reason why it's never going to get better. And you just take a look and see why that is. It's something in your story, something in your model that says, this limitation here is set in stone. Whatever it is, it's too late, it's too much, the damage is done, whatever. There's some limitation there that you just accept. And whenever you accept that story, whenever you accept the model that goes along with it. But look, Thomas Hanna says, hold on a second. That doesn't make any sense. Now, the whole world out there it supports your view. And so why do you have the view that you have of being a victim? Because that's what the world is telling you. You learn that. We all learn that. That's what the world has taught us. That doesn't make it true. Just because most people accept some limitations as just simply true, doesn't make them true. Doesn't mean that they actually are true, and that's a big deal. What it means actually, and we can experientially prove that this is true to ourselves through the practice of somatic education. But what's actually true is that that the majority of people are suffering from sensory motor amnesia, so they don't even know that they're doing it. They're accepting limitations and they don't even know it. And because everybody else, more or less, is accepting those same limitations, give or take, then there's not a lot of reason for most people to wake up. There's not a lot. I mean, there's plenty of reason. The pain is immense. But there's not. But the problem is the real answer is not widely known, and so most people shut down because there's something in our nervous system that says, "Look, here's just how it's organized. I have a desire. I'm going to try to fulfill that desire." That's what this nervous system is doing. I have a desire. I'm going to fulfill that desire. It's really kind of that simple. But if the nervous system is thwarted in its attempts to fulfill its desires often enough, or sufficiently enough, or painfully enough, so that it becomes the amount of resistance that we need to overcome in order to fulfill the desire no longer is palatable, then there's a function in our nervous system that says forget about it. And this is what Thomas Hanna identified: sensory motor amnesia. So sensory motor amnesia is just pretty much what the term says, but I'll spell it out. It means that your brain, this is another insight of Thomas Hanna. I mean, not exclusively him, others too, but he was an academic, and so he was had access to this material and made sense to him. But the research of brain activity shows that the brain appears to be very, very, very attuned to movement. In fact, it seems to be almost exclusively interested in movement. So the things that we, the arts, the, beauty, things that we, feelings, things that we're very attracted to, things that we really like, you might question, well, what does that have to do with movement? Actually, there's good reason to believe that all of those are really refinements of movement. It's how we, at a very fine level, are able to produce a particular state, and that state requires subtle movements, subtle fine adjustments of our nervous system and experience and bodies to experience these states that we find desirable. We find them pleasurable, we like them. And so it's a very high level, actually, of refinement of movement. So the brain is very interested, very, very interested in movement. And there's this portion of the brain that is called the sensory motor homunculus. And they're, by default, this region of brain, certain areas light up corresponding to certain parts of the body. So they've mapped, and if you wanted to Google it, sensory motor homunculus, you'd get a nice, funny looking image that might make sense of that. But this sensory motor homunculus is pretty much what our brain is organized around. And we're constantly interested in two fundamental things: wanting to take action, move, and to receive sensory feedback. Both of these are necessary. We have to have both of these things in order to be able to fulfill our desire, right? Any desire, the simplest desire, like I want water, I have to be able to reach for it. I have to be able to, grasp it, bring it to me. It's a whole process. Now that in that process, I need to be able to take action, and I need to get feedback that is self-correcting, right? So if you watch a young baby, you'll see, or like a, young, any young of any animal. We've got some baby goats right now. If you were to watch baby goats, you'd see that they are rehearsing their movements. So they've got, the goats are born with certain movement programs, but they're not well refined. They have to be practiced. We think it looks cute, but it's not cute for them. It's functional. It's like they're not bouncing around because it's cute. They're bouncing around because they're refining this essential movement pattern. Well, part of that is, they're like, okay, spring, I know the muscles in the legs are supposed to do this thing, but it's all spastic. So they get feedback. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I'm leaping. I'm having this experience. I'm kind of going this way. Oh, I just hit into another goat. They're getting feedback. There's an intention, actually. The intention is I want to take a very particular action, but all of the early expressions of that desired action, they're not quite right. They're maybe kind of in the right direction. They're more in the right direction than not, because the goat is born with that basic movement program already in there. But which is why they eventually get there, because they're born with that pattern there. So they already have the direction. And then everything is just a refinement of that. So I want to get water. I've got to be able to get feedback. I have to take action, and I've got to get feedback, because what if my hand goes off this way? I need to know, visually, I'm like, wait, that's not what I'm intending. I'm intending over here. So then I try again. So this sensory feedback portion is essential, as is the movement portion. So movement and sensory feedback, they go together like a hand in glove. If either piece is missing or not adequately developed or out of whack, well, then we don't have good results. We feel frustrated. We get hurt, you know, etc. So sensory motor amnesia is like the most basic thing that can go wrong to a human. And this is why it's so important, because it's the most basic thing that can go wrong, nothing else in life will work so long as you have sensory motor amnesia. At least if that sensory motor amnesia is in the way of you achieving your desires. Now, for most of us, we've reached the point where we've realized, yes, indeed, I have no problem admitting that my sensory motor amnesia, or whatever you want to call it, has gotten in the way of me experiencing the fulfillment of my desires, because some of my desires are not fulfilled. You know, I desire happiness and I'm not so happy. I desire to experience ease, but I experience great discomfort, and on and on. So the good news is that, you know, if all we could do was just describe the problem and give a name to it, we would be no better off than if we were calling it fibromyalgia or whatever you want to call it. We can call it anything. And it doesn't do us one bit of good. And it'd be the cruelest thing for me to, you know, say, hey, come learn about somatics. We've got a name for it. We got a story about it, and I'm going to teach you all about it. And that's it. And we just be the, you know, this, oh, you know, we get together and commiserate about our sensory motor amnesia. No, that's not the point. The point here is that we want to see that what we're dealing with, what we're calling sensory motor amnesia, is something that we can understand, and it's something that we can do something about because we have the right understanding. So now look, what if, can you imagine this? It's not hard because it's what's happened. Can you imagine that at some point in your life, maybe many points in your life, you had a desire and that desire was not fulfilled? Like you desired to, you know, walk across the floor, but you didn't succeed in that. Instead, you fell and got hurt. Or you had a desire to, you know, have a candy and you reached for it, but you got slapped. Or you had a desire to not be sitting at a desk, but you were forcing yourself to do that because you had a story that you needed to do that for 8-10 hours a day to be able to get money to pay the rent. Well, so that, you know, that desire to not be at the desk was also not fulfilled. Well, in any of these cases, what happens is that, given the right circumstances, which I'll get to in a moment, that becomes that that limitation, the lack of fulfillment of the desire, and importantly, what you do to prevent yourself from fulfilling the desire, becomes a habit, so that you don't even know consciously that you're doing it. Physically, what this means is that you've got muscles that are tense all the time. All your muscles? No, some of your muscles. Are they fully tense all the time? Probably not. Some of your muscles are a little bit tense all the time because your brain forgot how to stop doing that. Now, why did it? So that's what sensory motor amnesia is. You forgot that you're doing it, and you're no longer getting the correct sensory feedback. You're getting sensory feedback, but it's no longer interpreted correctly. You've forgotten how to interpret correctly. So what this looks like is, If you can't touch your toes with ease and pleasure, if you hold your breath when you're reaching for something, like on and on and on, so many examples of common everyday things that you're like, you got to be kidding me. Touch my toes, forget about it. See, that's the myth of aging right there. Everybody accepts that that's okay. But you got to think about it like Thomas Hanna did. Why? That doesn't make any sense. Why should you not be able to touch your toes? And if you tell me any reason, I'll tell you it's nonsense. Because humans are designed, the organism is designed, the bones are designed for that. You should be able to do it. So why are you not able to touch your toes with ease and pleasure? Because some of your back, your extensor muscles, your brain forgot to stop doing them. So they're just on all the time, at least a little bit. Some of them, and find the ones to blame. It's the piriformis, it's the hamstrings, it's the, it's like, it's all of them, it's none of them, it's some of them, whatever. It's somewhere in there, something for a fact, because you can't touch your toes with ease, that there's something in there that you've forgotten to let go of. Those muscles are not short. Well, they are short because you're holding them short, but they're not structurally short. Your muscles are absolutely perfect, as are your bones. Your brain is sending a signal to keep them tight. Now, think about this. If there's not a more clear and brilliant metaphor for the whole big problem that you're experiencing in life than this, I don't know what is. Just think about this. You want to touch your toes. I mean, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but just imagine for a moment, or whatever it is. But just for this example, imagine you want to touch your toes. Somebody, somehow you end up in a yoga class or something. And, you're like, I don't know how I got here, but all right, the teacher says I got to touch the toes. I'm going to touch the toes. And you're like, I'm going to go for it. You try. And what do? Think about it. Imagine it. Imagine how you do it. How does it feel when you imagine doing it the way that you know that you would do it? What does that feel like? Does it feel satisfying? No. It feels hard. And why does it feel hard? Because you are doing it. You're making it hard. So you have an intention. I want to touch my toes. What does that mean? That means you are in full flexion. It's a technical term. It doesn't matter. You don't have to care. But you're folded in two, not in a back bend, but forward, hinging at the hips. You're touching your toes. Easy peasy. Now, think about it. If all the muscles on the backside of your body were fully lengthened, that's exactly what would happen. You would just touch your toes, easy peasy. You'd say, oh, this feels so nice. Love touching my toes. But when you imagine doing it, that's not how you're doing it. Now, get this. Even when you imagine it, you're doing this, you're triggering what's called stretch reflex, which means you're causing, there's a thing in the body, in the nervous system, these, whatever they're called, axonal neurons or God knows what, they send some signal back, they go bam, like that, saying, this muscle's being stretched, we're being torn to bits, you got to pull harder. You can't think your way out of it. It happens automatically. You can't override it. And that's why every time you reach for your toes, your back hurts. Don't you feel the stretch in the back? And you say, well, isn't it supposed to be a stretch? No. I mean, if you go to the yoga class, they'll tell you it's a stretch, but no, you should never be stretching. Never. This is the worst thing you can do. Don't ever stretch. If you're stretching, you're just hurting yourself. But see how we've been conditioned by there's a belief that stretching's good. That pain that I'm feeling of that stretching sensation, that's good. That means I'm lengthening. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. Those muscles are all short. I'm supposed to lengthen them, right? It's good. It hurts. I'm stretching them. No, it hurts because your brain is saying, the hell are you doing stretching? You're killing me. Don't you know? This is the worst thing you could ever do. And here you are all jolly. Look at me, I'm in the yoga class. I'm touching my toes. Forget about the fact that I hurt. You're not, you know how strong your muscles are? Very, very strong. I won't even go into how strong. They are way stronger than you think. Way, way, way stronger. I promise you. Enormously strong. So if what's going to win? Your conscious mind trying to override that habit of all those muscles being tight, plus stretch reflex that's going to bring out full force of your muscles, or you're not going to overcome that with your desire to touch your toes. So what happens is, even if you say, look, what stretching works, I'm very successful at it. I know, look at me, I'm a contortionist. Yes, but you're in pain. And the reason you're in pain, if you're in that situation, is because even if you're stretching, what you're doing is you might be stretching, but you might be stretching the parts of you that should not be stretched. You don't want to stretch, you want to lengthen. You want to release the muscles that you've been holding chronically tight. You want to stop working against yourself, and that's the point. So look, if you have an intention, so this is the metaphor I want to be clear about. If you have an intention, then what you want, it's just basic mathematics. What you want is everything that gets you that with maximum efficiency and nothing opposed to it. If you're clear that you want something, you should not be hesitating. You should be 100%. Everything is only on that, nothing resisting. But most of us are like this, toe touching situation where we've got an enormous amount of resistance that we're trying to overcome. You're not going to win. You're fighting against yourself, and you're fighting against what? Your unconscious. Now, this is the real kicker. You have an intention consciously, but your conscious brain power, your conscious nervous system power is tiny. It's like 20-to-1 unconscious to conscious in terms of your nervous system's energy. Just makes sense. You got a gazillion different bodily functions that need to be going all the time, or you're dead. What's more important, that or touching your toes? It's easy. Well, here's why it has to be unconscious, because you think, no, touching my toes is more important. But if you had conscious control over everything, the instant that you had that decision that touching my toes is the most important thing, what's going to happen is you're going to drop dead, because everything else would just stop. So almost everything is in the unconscious. Beating the heart, filtering the blood, monitoring the pH, all this stuff is in the unconscious, where it should be, so that you can sleep, so that you can walk, so you can do other stuff. But that's also the reservoir of all of the learned patterns. So if you have a learned pattern that says, keep these muscles in the back tight, always keep them tight. If that pattern is there, which it is for everybody to some degree, then you got 95% saying maintain this, and you've got 5% that says I want to touch my toes. If the 5% of you that wants to touch your toes is crazy enough to get a personal coach to stand on you while you're doing it, and put some heavy plates on you and overwhelm you, you might win that game, but to your own detriment, because you rip things that would never repair. So here we take a very different approach. This is not about overcoming anything. This is about understanding fundamentally what I'm doing, becoming conscious of it so that I can cease to do it. So this, I want to touch my toes. What that means actually is that I want to release all of the muscles in the back, through the whole back chain, the hamstrings, the glutes, the calves, all the spinal erector muscles, all of that needs to release, lengthen. That's what, in a controlled fashion. I don't want to just be a rag doll, because my nervous system can't handle that. My goal is not just that I want to touch my toes once, because anybody could touch their toes once, probably, given the right, we could figure that out. You might snap, but a second before you die, you'd have conscious awareness of touching your toes. We could arrange that, but that's not actually what you want. That's why you got to get clear on what you really want. You don't want to touch your toes. You don't want to overcome chronic fatigue. You don't want to, smash your anxiety or whatever. Like, you don't want to do those things. What you want is to have the competence to be able to live your life knowing that you can do what you are wanting to do. Isn't it? It's kind of that simple. You want to have the competence and confidence that you can show up in your life and have a nice time. You want to have confidence that you can feel good. But now here's the difficulty, is that we've been sold this myth of aging, broader myth of decline, says, look, nobody gets out of here alive. Why don't you just stop complaining and just, shut up and suck it up like the rest of us? Just get through. And we've accepted that that's the best that we can have, because of this very fundamental thing that most people don't know about, but you do now. So this is a lot of theory, I understand, but please, this theory is very, very life-changing. And I'm going to give you, in the few, a little bit of time that we have remaining in this meeting, I'm going to tell you how to put this into practice. Now, you will come up with a million reasons not to practice, or to practice to call it practice, but to be practicing violence, rather than what I'm actually sharing here. So please understand, that's why I'm saying you got to understand fundamentally what this is, what the problem is, and what thereby the remedy must be. And any solution must be in alignment with that. So look, if the problem is sensory motor amnesia, in other words, I'm doing something that's working against myself and I've simply forgotten that I'm doing it. If that's the problem, then the solution is I need to become aware of what it is that I'm doing and have mastery so that I can cease to do what I don't want and only do what I do want. In other words, be efficient in my actions, know what I want, take efficient actions incrementally with feedback, right? It's sensory motor. So I'm taking action, getting feedback, and I'm correcting based on the feedback because I have the correct way of doing that. That's the goal. That's what we want. We want to, we don't want to touch our toes. We don't want to do any of those other things. What we want is to stop working against ourselves. So we have to become aware of what we're doing, We have to learn how to stop doing that. So then, how do we do that? Well, for sure, the way that we do it must be congruent with what it is that we're understanding about the nature of the problem and the remedy, and the remedy. What that means is, I'll just give you some clues. It can't be violent. Well, okay, so another little bit of theory. So you got to understand that we are dealing, we're dealing with the nervous system. So we want to be aware of, this is a self-mastery process. This is a tool set. Somatics is a tool set, knowledge, a framework, and a tool set for self-mastery. And so the self is self-expressed. That self is expressing through the nervous system. So where do we begin in this exploration of self-mastery? Well, I mean, first we'd want to know, who am I at a most basic level. We explore that in a lot more depth on the Monday and Friday meetings. In case that's not clear to you, we do those more in those meetings. But that's really a fundamental piece. We have to be clear on, who am I? Because when I know that I am, let's say, when I know that I'm prior to the experience, when I know that I'm the witness of the experience, then suddenly I'm at a higher level. I have agency here. If I believe that I am the conditioning, I can't do anything. When I see that I am aware of the conditioning, now I have the possibility of making change. So I need to see that. Then step two is to look at, okay, well, now expressing. Okay, so I know who I am at a fundamental level. I am prior to the experience, but this experience is still important to me. I care about this experience. I want a good experience. Well, great. That means that your nervous system is functioning at least that much. It's able to give you still that kind of very primal feedback to let you know, I want to feel good. Excellent. That's essential. So look, the nervous system, now we're starting to deal with the nervous system at a fundamental level. That's what we need to be doing. If we get ahead of ourselves, if we're just trying to do some movement, if we're trying to emulate something and we say, well, I'm doing the exercise. Joey said, do the exercise. Joey told me to get Thomas Hanna's book and do exercise number 1. And I'm doing it. Look, here, I'm doing it. Look, doesn't that look good? It might look good, but the real question is, how does it feel? So you got to be willing to forget about how it looks. How it looks matters, sort of. And like, that's what a good coach can offer, because they can give you that feedback. That's something you could show a coach, or a person, a somatic educator who's working with you. They could show, okay, here's I'm doing the exercise you showed me to do, and I'm not getting the results, even though I think I'm doing it the right way. And they could say, well, I can see why, and they can give you some feedback. Well, some of the things that they can see might be things that you can't see. So this is third person data. And so we're not going to try to cover that today, because that would be too much to ask. But there are things that somebody could give you feedback about that you can also be aware of. And so we want to make things conscious. These patterns have been made unconscious. That's why we're suffering from sensory motor amnesia. So part of the remedy is we have to make it conscious. Well, we know some things about conscious activity. Okay. So two of those things that we know that it is relatively slow compared to unconscious. So relative to unconscious, conscious activity is slow. Unconscious activity is fast in comparison to conscious activity. So we know that slow is a quality of conscious activity, and we know that focus, exclusive focus, is another quality, because you can multitask unconsciously, but consciously you can only do one thing at a time. So you can know these two things for sure, and any movement. This is and the beauty of this, and the reason why we're not lately taking time to do movements themselves during these meetings, is because when you understand these fundamental principles, yes, specific movements can give you great benefits, and I won't deny that, but without these basic principles, you could think that you're doing something to help yourself, and then you'd say it's not working, but you wouldn't really have been doing it. You would have just thought you were, because it looked kind of like it, but it wasn't. So you have to understand how to really know if you're, what the basic underpinnings of all this are. And then you can start to notice if you're doing it correctly. And when you do it correctly, any movement actually can be transformative in a positive way. That, to be clear though, I'm not saying that all movements are equal. Some movements are better than others in terms of they're more likely to give you the feedback necessary for you to have quick, positive results. But that's something that that's a little bit more involved, takes more education, maybe private work and whatever. So here we want to see though that when you have these basic understandings and you begin to apply them, you will get positive results. They may not be enormous positive results, but they will be positive results. And if you continue with them, you will continue to get positive results. So two things that you can do. So the goal is to make what is unconscious conscious, so that you can cease to do what is inefficient. So in order to make it conscious, you can help yourself by focusing on just the one thing and slowing down. So you get some pretty good feedback with those two, because you'll start to notice that you just have an intention. So this is like what I suggested last week. It's just a reminder really of that in terms of the practical application, is make a commitment. I really encourage you for 5, 10, maybe even just 1 minute, whatever is appropriate for you, but not more than 10 minutes once a day. Consciously dedicate yourself to somatic experiencing. I know somatic experiencing is trademarked. I'm not using it in that way, but to experience as a soma. So a soma is really, we can understand it as a pure 4-dimensional being. So independent of really your narrative and the restrictions and limitations, but just the pure ability to have agency to move and get feedback in 4 dimensions, to move forward and backward and side to side and up and down and in time. So, it's a fundamental subunit of, or however you understand it, of what it is to be human. So to start to experience in this way helps us to start to discover how we are limiting ourselves, how to stop doing that. So you slow down. So, okay, commit, whatever that's going to be for you. If you've never done this before, do 1 minute and commit to 1 minute. And that will be your baseline. You can, your benchmark, you can you can determine from that how that is. Maybe you say, oh, 1 minute, that was good. I was able to do that. Like maybe you try 2 minutes the next time until you want to find the right, maybe you say, wow, 1 minute is a long time, but 1 minute's a good amount of time, except for in very extreme situations. 1 minute, you can do that safely. You're just going to set aside that time and then commit to being focused for that time on this somatic experience, which means you're going to choose a movement. I'll give you some suggestions on some things you could choose. And you're going to give your attention to the experience of that. You're going to just feel that. You're going to have intention to do the movement. You're going to feel the movement, and you're going to continue that movement with attention on it for that amount of time, 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever amount of time you're dedicating to it. So of course, you're going to find your attention wanders. That's okay, as long as if it's too excessive, then it just probably means you need to maybe come back to a minute. It could be very excessive at a minute, but we just accept that. We just say, yeah, but 1 minute is our kind of like, we train for 1 minute, even if we have no ability to focus. And I'll respond to that question in a moment. So you're going to give your attention to this movement for that amount of time. Then you're going to do the movement slowly. How slowly? As slowly as necessary, so that you can feel good. So if this was just like, do this, see, a lot of we've been trained, exercise, do exercise, and we're like, oh God, I'll do exercise. Okay, I'll do the exercise because it's good for me. But when you do these exercises correctly, they're not good for you. You feel good. You don't have doubt. You don't need to say, oh, I'm doing it because it's good for me. You know that it feels good. Does it feel good the first second? Probably not. It depends how good you're feeling to begin with, right? But you commit yourself to it. You do it according to these guidelines, and you should feel better. You should feel better after 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So keep that in mind. Set yourself up for success. If you're saying, I'm going to power through, I know he said only do 1 minute, but I'm going to power through. I'm going to do 20 minutes. I know he said a maximum of 10 minutes, but that doesn't count for me because I'm a special case. I'm going to do 20 minutes. Hell, I'm going to do 30 minutes. Well, please don't do that, because you're setting yourself up in that case for some endurance thing that you're already failing at. You be honest about it. You're not going to succeed at that. All you're going to do is succeed at hurting yourself. That way better to say, I'm going to really, honest to goodness, just take the advice as it's given, not make exceptions. I'm going to just start with 1 minute, and I'm going to slow down. I'm going to be aware, and I'm going to feel better by doing this. Am I going to feel miraculously 100% better? Probably not. Could happen. It's unlikely. It would be, if you happened to luck into the one thing that's really the one piece that is holding the whole puzzle of misery together, and you happen to be really on today and you get it and you just let that go. Yeah, okay, it could happen. It's unlikely. But you should feel better. That should be, you should really have that expectation. That should be your goal. And if that doesn't happen, if you don't feel better, don't make this mistake and say, oh, it doesn't work. Or don't make this other mistake and say, oh, I guess I got to just try harder. No. What the correct way to understand that, if you do it and you don't feel better, the correct way to understand that is, how can I learn from this? What mistakes was I making that prevented it from working? And you revisit, what are these basic things? So one, you give your full attention, full focus to this one thing. It's such a novel experience for most of us to give our full attention to something, because we're usually so accustomed to being pulled a million different directions that at first we perceive it as uncomfortable. Not to be hypervigilant, we perceive as uncomfortable. To give your full attention to only one thing feels unsafe. Okay, that's why 1 minute. So please be gentle. That's another important point. But look, one, you give yourself fully to this for this amount of time. Basic steps again, just so we're reminded. Give your full attention to it for the amount of time that you're allotting. Slow down. You'll know that you're slowing down enough because you will have no choice but to give your full attention to it. So if you're in doubt, if you're saying, well, I'm not sure if I'm giving my full attention to it, well, you're not. So slow down. You can't have the thought, I'm not sure if I'm giving my full attention to it, if you're giving your full attention to it. So it's a very, very clear clue, if you're having that thought or any other thought, that you're not giving your full attention. So slow down more. How much can you slow down? You might be surprised. You could slow down a lot. You could slow down so much that you could be moving, but not even seeming to be moving. And you could do that for a full minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So you want to slow down. Then you got to be gentle. It's so important, because the way in which the unconscious is maintained, well, let me rephrase that, qualify it. The way that the unconscious incompetence, not the unconscious competence, because unconscious competence is good. We like that. We feel it. We feel like in the zone. But unconscious incompetence is different, and it is maintained through violence and momentum. Now, some people have heard me say that for months or years, and then they don't believe it or they don't get it, and then they finally get it. I want everybody to please save yourself some time and just get it right now. Just accept that I'm telling you the truth. It's not just some useless thing that I'm throwing in there. This is a key point. The way that unconscious incompetence is maintained is through violence and momentum. So when you find yourself doing any activity and you are squeezing yourself, holding your breath, if you feel like you're about to explode, if you're feeling bad when you're doing something, or if you're not feeling great when you're doing something, notice how many things you accept that, oh, they just feel bad to do. Nonsense. Nothing feels bad. That's an impossibility. Things don't feel, you feel. So, but we talk about it like, oh, that feels bad. Nonsense. Like touching my toes feels bad. Touching your toes doesn't feel bad. How could an action feel bad? You feel bad. You feel bad because you're doing it through this unconscious incompetent pattern, which is maintained through violence and momentum. So you will notice, because you're doing something that you can't, there's a momentum to it. So now, does this mean that you have to now become a sloth? That everything in your life you have to be, it's all mindful movement and it's all super slow? No, that's not our goal. But the goal is, Hannah would call it sensory motor awareness, but that is conscious competence. We're living right there on the edge where we can bring into conscious awareness anything that we need to, but we can also trust in an enormous amount of it in the just below the conscious threshold, where it's taken care of for us by the unconscious, because it frees us up. But that's because those are conscious patterns, rather competent patterns. But in order to get there, there's this intermediary stage where we have to shift from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. This is this part where we usually give up. We say it didn't work. Then we have to make it consciously competent. Then it becomes consciously, unconsciously competent. But in that process of gaining mastery so that we can develop this unconscious competence, we have to go through this stage where it's conscious, which means slow. So for these 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute, move slowly. You got to move slowly so that it becomes conscious. Then you have to have this question kind of there to guide you. How can I make it easier? How can I make this lighter? It's not so that you can plan out the action. It's just so you can start to trust that. It's like prompt it, whatever phrase works for you, but it's to prompt yourself and remind yourself that I'm making this harder than it needs to be. I can become aware of that and I can ease up on that. So when you follow those rules, those guidelines, you will get good results. Will you get whiz-bang, overnight miracle results? Probably not. But you will get good results. Good meaning you will feel better a little bit. And part of that is enormous, though, because even though you might only feel a little bit better, you will have gained the clarity that you were able to do something to help yourself. Namely, you were able to become aware of what it is that you were doing that was working against yourself. And you can keep repeating that. That's where it becomes miraculous. Once you experience that, then you know, oh, I can repeat that. I can keep getting good results. So, and the results should continue to be good. You should always feel better. Don't make the mistake of falling back into the trap of, oh, it's going to be another one of those things. I got to work hard for years at it. No. Why? It might take a little bit of time. I'm not going to deny it. It's not because it needs to necessarily. It's just that I don't know, we're a little clunky. We're, like we're at early stages of this process and learning it. So we've got to give ourselves some slack. Got to learn, but you have to keep learning. So always be learning. Learn from each experience. What can I do better? What can I do better? How can I get to this? How can I get to where I got to when I sat here and I did this movement with awareness, slowly, with intention for 5 minutes, and I do in fact feel better. How can I start my next 5 minutes when I do this tomorrow? How can I start my 5 minutes where I leave off today? I might not be coming to it from that, of course, because I might have forgotten, fallen back into my sensory motor amnesia, but how can I remember more quickly so that I start my 5 minutes? It's like, that's why I talk about, for those who've been hanging around for a while, I talk about low-hanging fruit. Notice the low-hanging fruit when you just notice what's there that I'm holding on to that I don't need to. Isn't that a lot quicker now? Aren't you more aware of more things that you can more easily just stop doing? You should be. And that's what I'm saying, is that each time you should be learning something more that you establishes a new pattern, strengthens a new pattern that's a healthier, more functional pattern, so that you can more easily access that. Then you're developing what eventually becomes unconscious competence, but it has to be conscious in the learning process. So now I know we're going way over, but I'll wrap it up with some suggestions for some movements you can do. So a great one for anybody who has ability to move the pelvis, okay, is to move the pelvis. Try lying on your back with your knees bent, and feel that, at first you don't have any idea how much tension you're holding in the front side of the body. You have no idea. You're gonna say, when you become aware of how much tension you're holding there, you're gonna say to me, I didn't believe you when you said it, but now I do. I thought you were exaggerating, but now I know that you're telling the truth, because you have no idea. No matter how much tension you're aware of, there's way more than you are aware of. So you have to lie down on your back, knees bent. You can put your hands on your belly and just see how can you let your belly be soft. Let it sink down. Let your breathing be relaxed so that nothing is, as you're breathing, nothing is straining. You're not pushing anything, you're not pulling anything. So things are moving, abdomen's moving, chest is moving, but let them move freely, rather than according to these rigid fixed patterns that you're not aware of presently, but that you can become aware of through this exploration. Okay, so that's just preliminary. You just feel that, let the belly sink down, relax. Down meaning as you're lying on your back, it's going toward the spine, relaxing toward the spine. Then start to have the intention, as you next inhale, you slowly arch the lower back. See how, don't make it too big, just enough that you have full competence. Should be no spasming, no anything of that sort, just full competence that you can smoothly, slowly arch the lower back as you inhale. And then as you exhale, slowly release that. That's a great starting point for anybody who has the ability to do that. Now, if you don't have the ability to do that, as I understand, for a variety of reasons, some people may not, then what you can do is you can simply, there are many things that you could do, but I'll give you a couple of suggestions for things that you can explore. So one would be that you could just move the eyes, okay? Just see, can you move the eyes just a little bit to the right and a little into center and a little to the left and the center. And you could even use your finger like I'm demoing here. And don't try to get the biggest range possible. It's about what can you do with competence, smoothness, comfort. And maybe you'll say, oh, I can't do any eye movement at all without strain. My eyes are always straining. Well, okay, a lot of people are like that. Most people are like that. They don't even know it. A lot of people wearing glasses don't need to be wearing glasses. It's just their eyes are constantly straining. Their brain forgot to let go. But you can relearn. That's the important thing. So you just do this slow. Remember, it's slow, with focus, gentle, with the intention of feeling better. So you want to let your eyes feel better. Let them be as relaxed as possible. You can slow it way down and you'll notice your eyes jump. They can't stay with it. That's okay. So make it a smaller movement. Just the smallest movement that you need, whatever that is, so that you can have the experience of something smooth and competent and easy. So that but the easy, don't expect that just to happen to you. You have to be on the lookout for how you're making it harder. So you have to feel as you're doing it. How am I straining? Is one of my eyes held back where it doesn't need to be? Is one of my eyes, resisting something? It's one of my eyes feeling comfortable. It's one of my eyes out of focus. You just let it, you have to become aware internally. Subtle cues, and you just notice you can start to release. Be aware of that, and you're building this sort of repertory of competence. So you have to have patience with it, but bit by bit, you develop that range, smoothness, competence, confidence, ease, pleasure. These are all things that you have to choose, though. Don't just say, oh, it didn't work. If you're not noticing those things, ask yourself, why not? What am I doing to get in the way? Am I slowing down enough? Am I relying on momentum and violence? You got to be aware. You got to just notice that you'll feel it. You'll feel their feelings of frustration. These are like ancient things that are there. Ancient, or at least ancient in our lifetimes. They at least go back to early childhood patterns that we developed, where we just said, I'm frustrated. I'm whatever the pattern is there, and you just notice it, and notice that you can let it be lighter. You can ease up. So I think I answered the questions. Let me just make sure, and then we'll wrap up. Oh, so there was another question. You to me saying, do I suggest which movement is for whom? A competent somatic educator can give a very skilled somatic educator can give somebody a specific set of movements to do that will give them very good results for their desired outcome. I am not presently that skilled. I am developing those skills. So I can give some personalized guidance. I certainly have enough knowledge to be able to point people in a generally useful direction. But there are practitioners who have enough training that they can give more precise movements for an individual than I'm presently trained to do. But it's a training that I'm undertaking, so it's something that's in progress for me. And that's it from my end. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Please do put it into practice. Remember, you can't really expect to get the results if you don't do the practice. Please don't overdo it, because it won't give you as good of results. I honestly mean that. So please just do a maximum of 10 minutes once a day. That's not a forever thing. That's a for now thing. Be respectful of that, and you'll get better results. Remember these simple guidelines, and you're guaranteed to get good results. So have intention, focus, slow down, be gentle, and expect that you are to feel better. So have that as your guiding light, so that you are opening yourself to the better feeling. Bit by bit, you keep opening to the better feeling, knowing that you are, this is right. This is what you are doing. You are practicing how to have competence in having this better feeling, which is your desire. It is your intention. And this is the way how. This is the, that gives you the framework, the understanding, the tools to be able to achieve that. So uh, please, please do put it into practice. And then let me know, maybe we'll try to find a way to have more time for more questions and answers or something for specific to this, so that as you're putting it into practice, you'll have more questions that will be based on your actual experience. You'll want feedback, you'll have doubts about certain things, or you'll want to know, should I do this or that? And we can have much more interesting and useful conversations as you're putting it into practice, because then you'll be speaking from direct experience and it will be enormously beneficial for everybody. So this could really be quite an exciting collective project, a collective project where we all benefit. But it depends upon everybody actually being able to speak from their direct experience. So that's my ideal. I would really like that, because I know it will be wonderful for you, and it will be wonderful for everybody else. It'll just be a wonderful thing all across the board. We'll all benefit in a kind of exponential fashion because we'll be benefiting from one another's experiences. So thank you. And I will see you next time. Blessings to you. Bye for now.